To one and all, I heartily welcome one and all for this World Obesity Day virtual program. All delegates who have joined virtually from whichever place you have joined to learn from the esteemed faculty. On this occasion, I welcome our guest of honor, Dr. P.S. Shankar, Professor Emeritus, Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, Bangalore, who needs no introduction. I welcome Dr. Shivraj Alshetty, President MESAT, Dr. Murugesh Pastapur, Chairman API and team. I welcome our guest of honor, Dr. Bansi Sabu from Ahmedabad, President RSSDI, and President Indian Obesity Society, a dynamic, innovative, technology-driven, highly loved by all. His schedule did not permit him to come to Gulbarga for our earlier invite, but made it happen virtually. He has taken National RSSDI into an international organization, putting RSSDI in world map, conducting so many programs. His innovative programs like IDEAL, Virtual National RSSDI Conference, Facebook Live, Heart Diabetes, and others. He is the man who has explored digital platform in this COVID-19 pandemic new normal era. On this occasion, I salute the COVID-19 healthcare workers for rendering their untired service to COVID-19 patients. Even few have lost their lives too. I welcome our guest faculty, Dr. Sanjay Kalra, Chief Endocrinologist and immediate past President, Endocrine Society of India from Karnal, a great academician and a master teacher and a scientist. His passion for teaching is highly appreciated all over. He visited Gulbarga earlier to our invite to deliver Dr. Muralidhar Rao S. Rao oration. I also welcome Dr. Krishna Seshadri, Chief Endocrinologist from Apollo Chennai, who visited Gulbarga earlier also. An international faculty, a researcher, a great scholar and a philosopher, a great teacher, loved by all, being our chief moderator. Last year in ADA Palms, could see his wonderful moderation with Dr. Eugenie Braunwald, the so-called father of cardiology. I invite other faculty, Dr. Abhishek Katakvar, a bariatric and a metabolic surgeon from our own AIG family, an international reputed institute headed by Dr. D. Nageshwar Reddy, Asian Institute of Gastroenterology, Hospital, Hyderabad. He is heading as an associate director of obesity and metabolic division, trained in reputed centers in Korea, Taiwan, and other places. Let us not waste time by reading their CV profile, which runs in pages. Let us utilize time by airing and exchange of knowledge with them in their respective specialty. As I can see, more than 100 delegates who are registered from outside Gulbarga, like other states like Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Himachal, Bihar, Delhi, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Punjab, and so many other states, like making a national event. The advantage of virtual meeting, which COVID-19 pandemic has taught a new normal life. That speaks how powerful the speakers are there in their specialty. Now we have a formal virtual inauguration.
शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शत्रुबुद्धिविनाशाय दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते दीपज्योतिर्नमोऽस्तुते शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः दीपज्योतिर्जनार्दनः दीपज्योतिर्परब्रह्म दीपज्योतिर्जनार्दनः दीपो हरतु मे पापम् सन्ध्यादीपनमोऽस्तु ते शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः शुभं कुरुत्वं कल्याणम् आरोग्यं धनसम्पदः.
Thank you. Now I request Dr. P.S. Shankar to address.
Dr. Sabu, Dr. Kalra, Dr. Abhishek, Dr. Seshadri, Dr. Alshetty, Dr. Sangram, Murugesh, and delegates. I am happy to be in the World's Obesity Day celebration, to be a participant. World Obesity Day is observed globally on 4th March, it's today, as per the directions of the World Obesity Federation, with a view of promoting the practical solutions to end the global obesity crisis. Obesity is a disease. We are raising awareness and improving the understanding of its roots, cause, and the actions needed to address them. There is need to create a healthy environment that prioritizes the obesity as a health issue. Obesity, its rates have nearly tripled since 1975 and have increased almost 5 times in children and adolescents, affecting the people of all ages from all social groups in both developed and developing countries. In our country also it is increasing. Obesity is a major risk factor for various non-communicable diseases such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, osteoarthritis, obstructive sleep apnea, and stroke, and various forms of cancer. We have not fully understood the root causes of obesity, which are often a complex mixture of dietary, lifestyle, genetic, psychological, socio-cultural, economic, and environmental factors. It is time we break the cycle of the shame and the blame and reevaluate our approach for addressing this complex global public health problem. Together, we can make a difference. There is a lot we can do, including restricting the marketing to children of food and drinks high in fats, sugar, and salt, taxing sugary drinks, and providing better access to affordable, healthy food. In our cities and towns, we need to make space for safe walking, cycling, and recreation. We must teach our children healthy habits from early on. At individual level, people practice healthy lifestyles, eating a healthy diet that helps in preventing obesity and undertake regular physical activity that helps to maintain a healthy weight. This day is dedicated to addressing the global obesity epidemic. It gives opportunity for everyone to work together for happier, healthier, and longer lives for everybody. The World Obesity Day has been established by the World Obesity Federation on 2015 as an annual campaign against obesity. Its goal is initiating and supporting the practical actions that will help people achieving and maintaining a healthy weight and reverse global obesity crisis. It is first time we are celebrating the day in our city, for which I congratulate Dr. Sangram, Dr. Alsetti, and Murugesh. I am happy to inaugurate this program and I wish the program all success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. Now I request Dr. Bansi Sabu, guest of honor, to address the gathering.
First of all, Dr. Sangram, thanking you for giving me an opportunity. I'm really very happy to be part of this webinar and as a guest of honor, being a president of Indian Obesity Society, which is ARO, and also I'm president of RSSDI. The biggest difference between diabetes and obesity here is, for obesity, hardly there is any awareness. I mean, people with weight of BMI of more than 30, even most of the time, neither healthcare professional or person with obesity, they recognize themselves that they are obese. Forget about the BMI between the 25 to 30, while they are also in, as far the Asian Indians is concerned, they are also obese. Most of us, even with the central obesity, which is one of the very major risk factor, still they are not recognizing. Healthcare professionals are not treating them for the obesity. We don't talk about the obesity, and lifestyle modification is not being done appropriately. This World Obesity Day gives us an opportunity to increase the awareness. And today, as I'm busy since morning to evening, you know, talking about the diabetes and obesity and all other aspects. But if you see the incidence wise and prevalence, even we have the 15% to 18% adult population in urban area is having diabetes. But if you see the obesity incidence, it's almost like double. Whatever the incidence which we are seeing of diabetes, the obesity incidence and prevalence is almost double what we have of diabetes. The biggest problem is at this point of time, we don't have any medication to treat it. It's only the lifestyle modification or the treatment by the diet and exercise. And that's maybe the one of the reasons that no industry or no pharmaceutical companies which are supporting this obesity, and that may be the reason that healthcare professionals are not actually actively involved in management of obesity. Now you can understand that how awareness is there. Even during this COVID time, the vaccination is to be given to all those persons with comorbidity, where the comorbidity is considered like cardiac disease or diabetes, but obesity is not considered. Those who are obese, even though their age is more than 45, and even they are obese, and we all know as a medically that obesity is also one of the very important risk factor for somebody. If they develop COVID infection, the morbidity and mortality is high in the obese person in compared to the normal. Still, it is not been considered as a comorbidity, and they should be vaccinated. So, I mean, the people consider that somebody who is overweight and obese, or even up to the BMI of 30, they are considered healthy. Unless somebody is having a BMI of more than 35, which is morbidly obese, they are only recognized they are obese person or they are overweight. So, I am really very happy that today we had kept a webinar on this subject, which is very, very important on the day of World Obesity. But my request to all the physicians and all who are attending, that we should do regular meetings on obesity, the way we are doing for hypertension, the way we are doing for diabetes or for other endocrine problems. So that is my request to all of you. And requesting every one of you who are not the member of Indian Obesity Society, please visit our website and please become the member of Indian Obesity Society. That what we call is ARROW. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. Now, without wasting much time, we move on to the scientific session. I request Dr. Sanjay Kalra to deliver his talk on person-centered obesity management tools and the targets. Over to Dr. Sanjay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this invitation to e-visit Gulbarga and Karnataka once again. It is always a pleasure being part of the Gulbarga family, which is known all over India for its expertise and excellence in academics. We'll talk today of person-centered obesity care. Now, these two words, obesity and person-centered, have become a part of our dictionary, a part of our lexicon. But over the next 20 to 30 minutes, let us see if we are just paying lip service to these words, or if actually we can internalize these words as philosophies in our day-to-day practice. Is obesity important for the country? Data from the latest National Family Health Survey published last year show that in Karnataka, 30% of all men and women are overweight or obese. They have a BMI of 25 or more. And if you look at central obesity, then in women, the percentage goes up to 45%. In men, it goes up to 39%. That means if you look at central obesity, at least 2/5 of adult Karnataka is obese. The issue is that we have at the same time a burden of obesity or overweight and a burden of malnutrition. You can also have a person who is obese, yet who is malnourished. He may be obese, she may be obese, but she may have protein malnutrition, or she may have micronutrient malnutrition. So this is the maze, the nutritional minefield that we have to navigate as physicians. So we have seen that obesity is important, not only for Gulbarga, not only for Karnataka, but actually for the entire country. The word person-centered has been used many times in many places. Is this theoretical or is it actually practical? The answer is that it is practical. All of us who are in serving our countrymen and women are person-centered. We are patient-centered. We keep in mind the patient's needs and preferences and wishes when we plan therapy. Whether you are planning investigations or treatment, whether it is medical or surgical, you have to be person-centered. So today, we will look at obesity and we will speak about the 4 T's and how we can apply person-centered management or concepts or philosophy to these 4 T's. We look first at the techniques that we use to screen and diagnose obesity. We look at the thresholds that are used to decide when we want to intervene or intensify. We'll see whether the techniques and thresholds that we are discussing are actually person-centered or not. In the second part of our talk, we'll talk about tools and targets. What are the tools that we have for treatment? And what are the targets that we need to follow or we need to focus on when we are treating a person with obesity? This discussion about person-centered care is equally important for physicians as it is for surgeons. It is important for every member of the healthcare team, whether he or she is leading the healthcare team or whether he or she is part of that. So let's first focus on techniques and thresholds. Now, when you look at diabetes, you have glucose as a number to diagnose it. So that's fine. You have HbA1c as a number. You keep HbA1c as a target. But for the past 2 decades or more, we have understood that we should not be glucocentric in diabetes care. Diabetes is a multi-dimensional, multi-metabolic syndrome. So we have to look at each and every aspect of diabetes. We have to look at not only the biomedical aspects, like maybe the cholesterol number or the weight or the blood pressure number, but also at the psychological aspects. Yet, we do not seem to be discussing the same thing in obesity. We look at obesity just as a BMI, as a number. So my question to all of us is obesity definition just a number? Is it more than that? Is it less than that? When we treat osteoporosis, let us say we are looking at bone mineral density, BMD, not BMI, then we have different thresholds for diagnosis, different for initiation of therapy. We have different diagnosis, different thresholds for each age group. Should we follow the same for obesity or not? Let's see what the following slides share with us. WHO classifies weight in a different way. Countries like Malaysia, which are multi-ethnic, have their own issues because they grapple with different ethnicities, and so they have their own classification. Asia Pacific is a huge continent, Asia and Australasia, and the WHO gave different guidelines for them. A quiz question which I'm fond of asking is, in every country, the normal waist circumference for a woman is less than it is for men. But there is one country where women have a greater waist circumference than men. Which one is that? So if you see that there is so much diversity across the world, even we are not able to figure out whether the waist circumference should be more for women or men, because every ethnic group is different. It has a different phenotype. Obviously, we need person-centered diagnostic criteria. These are the criteria that are followed in India. We can use body mass index or waist circumference or waist hip ratio. And if you have DEXA, then body fat percentage. If we use BMI, which is what is used in most OPDs, then we would take 23 and above as being overweight, 25 and above as being obese. If you're looking at children, then it is the percentile for age that we look at. If the child is more than 85th percentile for age in weight, then the child is overweight. If it's more than 95th percentile, it's obese. So this means that 5% of all children at any given point of time for any age will be obese. But in adults, we follow standard criteria. And like I said, 25 and above is obese. And we have grade 1 to 3. But like we said, obesity is much more than a number. So this concept of Barrow phenotype was coined by Indian colleagues. ABCDE reminds us that when you assess the phenotype of an obese person, look at the following things. A is for adipose topography, the severity of obesity, the style of weight distribution, how swiftly things are changing, and if there are any syndromic features of hypothalamic obesity or not. Remember that adipose tissue can be deposited in 3 places: the subcutaneous tissue, the visceral tissue, and also ectopic tissue. Ectopic tissue can be the liver, the pancreas, the epicardium, the retropharynx. All these will bring a different, all these will create a different approach when we are managing these patients. Adipose topography should be assessed, but along with that, we should assess the barometabolic behavior of the particular individual. Diet patterns, exercise patterns, stress and sleep patterns. No assessment will be complete if we do not assess the comorbid status. So look for metabolic, medical, mechanical or musculoskeletal and mood disturbances. All these are part of the assessment of a patient with obesity. All these should contribute to the definition of obesity, and they should contribute to our deciding diagnostic and interventional thresholds. It is also important to see whether the patient is experiencing discomfort or dysfunction because of obesity. The discomfort may be emotional or social. The dysfunctionality may be biomedical, metabolic, or it may be biophysical, for example, osteoarthritis of the knees. And all these are coupled with assessing E for enthusiasm and expectations of the patient. Now, suddenly we realize that obesity is much more than a number. We are speaking of person-centered obesity care. We are right now talking about tools and techniques. And suddenly we see that there are so many things to assess in an obese person who comes to us. We shouldn't forget the psychological aspect of obesity. Ego dystonic obesity is when you are upset with your obesity. You keep on trying to fight it with or without success. And you may not reach the optimal weight, but you certainly reach a state of depression or anxiety. There is a concept known as orthorexia nervosa. This is quite common in medical professionals, in nutritionists. Ortho means upright, like in orthopedics. So orthorexia nervosa means, just like anorexia nervosa, orthorexia nervosa means that you become so focused on righteous eating. You keep on counting your calories. You keep on counting your carbs, your simple carbs. You keep on counting your windows for intermittent fasting. That becomes the only goal of life, just following the numbers. My dietitian told me to eat food for 5 hours and 29 minutes in a day, and the rest of the 18.5 hours I have to fast. And if I go out overboard by 5 minutes, that means life has come to an end. That is orthorexia nervosa. On the other hand, there will be happy people, happy and obese and overweight people who are egocentric. So they are obese, they live life happily ever after with obesity. Of course, they can't resist eating ice creams and idlis and dosas. But putting all this in mind, this is what our Canadian researcher friends created. They created something in Edmonton obesity staging system. Because they found out that the increased, the more the weight, the more the mortality. But when they used the Edmonton obesity staging system, they found out that mortality was linked even more with obesity stages than with BMI classification. So EOSS, or Edmonton obesity stage, uses not only body weight, but it also uses other aspects of weight. Let's look at this staging score and let's anchor ourselves at stage 2 for the time being so that we understand what this means. Stage 2 means that a person has established obesity-related comorbidities. Remember those comorbidities? Medical, metabolic, mechanical or musculoskeletal, and mood. The patient may have moderate psychological symptoms or moderate functional limitation. So moderate dysfunction, moderate discomfort, and established obesity-related comorbidities. This is stage 2. And this is a patient where you would want to treat. Below this would be stage 1 and stage 0. In stage 0, there is no risk factor. So that's primordial prevention is required. Stage 1 is subclinical risk factors are there. So primary prevention is required. Patient may have mild symptoms, mild psychological dysfunction. Beyond stage 2 is stage 3 and 4. In stage 3, there may be significant target organ damage due to obesity, significant psychological or physical limitation. And stage 4 is disabling psychological discomfort or severe functional or physical limitation. Now, in all these, a different type of therapy is required. In stage 0 and 1, you would want primordial and primary prevention. Stage 2 would be secondary prevention, while stage 3 would be tertiary prevention. This is the model that we got from Canada. An Indian model suggests that you should follow the secured model. So when you are assessing your patient, when you're speaking with him or her, about whether you should treat or not. Of course, you look for the severity of obesity, you look at the numbers, but you also look at the expected prognosis or lifespan of the patient. E. C, you look at the comorbid condition, and you look at the urgency of control. What impact will there be if you control glucose, if you control weight? Some patients may come and say, I want weight control immediately, and I am willing to go on a very, very low calorie diet for that. But then you explain the risk of complications, malnutrition, cholelithiasis, and try to rationalize the therapy and the aim of therapy for the patient. And like in Edmonton, we have E and D, which is environmental factors and dysfunction and disability. So this is another model which helps us understand what is to be done. Now, what is to be done? Do we have tools to measure obesity? Dr. Banshi Sabu began by saying that there is very little interest from pharma. That is true. But the coming decade should be the decade of obesity. And even without support from pharma, we do have many tools that we can use to achieve our targets. So let's now talk about tools and then about targets. The tools we have are our clinical acumen. As physicians, I will request our chairperson, and I will also request Dr. Sangram Biradar to remember how we used to manage our patients 30, 40 years ago. Amoebic liver abscess used to be there. What drugs did we have? Tuberculosis was there. What drugs did we have? But we managed. And today, let us say, look at the MD medicine resident. Maybe he has 1,000 drugs at his disposal. He is working 24 hours a day. But even 50 years ago, the MD medicine resident was working 25 hours a day, even without those drugs. And he was doing a good job of managing his patients. So armed with this clinical acumen, we ask our patient, would you like to get treated? We assess our patient. Then we advise, then we come to an agreement, and then we assist. This 5A framework is useful not only in obesity, but in every chronic disease, including diabetes and hypertension. So after asking our patient, we have to assess. All obese patients are not the same. Some of them may be obese because of less activity, some because of overeating, some because of both of the above, and some because of a metabolic dysfunction. There may be an endocrine or metabolic dysfunction or an inherited disorder or a syndrome which is causing weight gain. To understand this, we have to understand the concept of barocrinology. The concept of barocrinology states that weight homeostasis is based upon hormonal factors. So therefore, weight dysfunction or obesity will also be based on endocrine factors. And we have to understand the various causes of obesity, the various endocrine etiologies, and also comorbid conditions in the clinical presentation of obesity. When we are managing obesity, what are the endocrinotropic drugs that can be used? What are the possible endocrine dysfunctions that can occur if you manage obesity too aggressively or too little? And what kind of outcomes and adverse effects can you expect? If we have a fair understanding of this subject, it becomes very easy to assess for the cause of obesity and also to assess for the complications, which can be mental or mood related, which can be mechanical. Osteoarthritis is one example, sleep apnea is another, which can be metabolic, the whole metabolic syndrome, including NAFLD, and which can be monetary or psychosocial. Obesity actually has a great impact on personal life and monetary life. So once we have asked the patient and we have assessed the patient, we then agree upon what we are going to do. First of all, we agree upon the definition of success and weight loss expectations. Now, patients may want to lose 20 kg in 2 weeks, but that is not realistic. And then what you tell them is, see, it has taken you 10 years to gain this weight. We should have at least 10 months to reduce it. Also, do not define success just as one number. If, let us say, you and your patient define success just as a normal HbA1c in diabetes. Now, you know, and I know, and Dr. Sangram Biradar sir knows that 50% of the time or more, you are going to lose that battle. Very rarely you will be able to bring A1C down to normal. Same in obesity. If the only definition of success that I have is linked to BMI, then all my education is of no value because there is so much more to obesity than BMI. Secondly, chances of failure are more. So let me redefine success. So I will say, madam, let us begin such and such therapy. It can be pharmacological, non-pharmacological. Next week, you will come back feeling much lighter. You will come back feeling happier. Now, what is my definition of success? Feeling light, feeling happy. You will be able to work faster, more efficiently. Efficiency, swiftness. Your waist circumference may come down. So I added another number, waist circumference. Your clothes will begin to fit you better. People will appreciate. So I tell the gentleman who is of my age, so you know the neighbor next door, she is going to praise you and she will say, Mr. Sharma, what are you doing? You're looking very handsome. Now that itself is enough for a smile to come. Now I have created 10 definitions of success. The next time patient comes to me, at least in 1 or 2 of them I will pass. So I'm a good bariatric physician. So create a realistic expectation. Define success in multiple ways. Tell the patient that ideal weight, what the numbers are giving, what the charts are giving, that is good in its own place. But the best weight might be something else. Like me, for example, when I try to lose weight, I find that I can't work. I'm able to work in the OPD. I'm able to do spinal level work. But if I have to deliver a talk or I have to write a lecture, then I'm not at my best if I'm trying to lose weight and I'm restricting carbohydrates. So my best weight might be actually 5 kg above my ideal weight. Also agree upon drivers of weight gain. Do an eating diary for 24 hours or 7 days and see what is the time that the patient eats maximum food or exercises the least. There is something known as Pareto's law, Pareto. This actually came from economics, from an Italian economist who said that 80% of all the money is controlled by 20% of the population. In eating also, in food intake, you will find that 80% of the times we are able to restrict our diet, but 20% of the times we get stuck. Patient might be taking coconut oil at just one time of the day, or he might be taking butter and prantas at another time of the day, and that is creating all the weight gain. So you just find that 20% and correct it. And whatever you do things in such a way that it is sustainable. So now that we have talked to our patient, we have asked, we have assessed, and we have agreed upon therapy. So what is the therapy? You can have 2 types of therapy, non-pharmacological and pharmacological. We will request the next speaker to speak about surgery. But in non-pharmacological, we have diet and we have lifestyle. Both of these will work only if we have something called behavioral therapy along with us. And you will find that some patients do well on diet and exercise alone. Others do need injectables or orals. They need pharmacotherapy. Yet others do not do well on drugs, and so they need surgery. But all these patients, they're all different. Each is an individual. For each patient, you have a different intervention threshold for therapy, and you have a different intensification threshold. So let's talk about this. Many times in obesity, you will see that your patients will get frustrated with you at the slow speed of treatment. So this is some guidance that we get from Indian philosophy, from the Bhagavad Gita, which says that the right outcome will be achieved only if you have the right action, the right intent, and the right direction. And I will request our moderator, Dr. Krishna Seshadri, at the end, sir is an expert on this, to speak about how we can use traditional philosophy to motivate our patients to follow appropriate healthcare related behaviors. Action is that we have begun trying to fight obesity. The intent is that we have to be steadfast. Even if you have small roadblocks or you have small speed breakers on the way, like yesterday I gained 400 grams. That is not the end of the world. I will continue working. I will continue exercising and dieting, and I will maintain the same direction. Many of our patients, especially the younger ones, they think only of the destination. So this Urdu poem says, the destination has its own charm, manzile apni jagah, but the journey has its own charm, raste apni jagah. So from philosophy, from religion, we get the teaching that you are in charge only of your karam or your activity. You do not have right over the fruit or the phal or the outcome. But certainly you tell them the outcome will come, the optimal outcome will come, provided you keep on doing the right activities in the same direction. Armed with this, and this is a continuous process, it will continue over, or throughout life, we start only lifestyle modification, or we start lifestyle modification and pharmacotherapy. Even if surgery is needed, there will be a period of time where you need to do metabolic optimization prior to surgery. So you just cannot operate a patient who is coming in on day one. Even our surgeons will require some period of metabolic optimization. How do we decide how to treat and what to treat? Go back to Edmonton staging. If you have a person in stage 2, that was disease plus established comorbidity, so we will start with medical therapy. Before that, in stage 1 and 0, we might start only lifestyle modification and behavioral therapy. Above that, we can choose medical or surgical treatment in stage 3 and 4. Non-pharmacological therapy will be done under 3 headings. One is healthy eating, the other one is physical activity, and the third is behavioral therapy. I would like to focus on this single slide. We all know the content of diet. We all know the content of exercise prescription, but we are not able to get results. The reason is that we are not able to get our patient to modify behavior. So either you hire a mental health professional or you learn the concepts of behavioral therapy yourself. And I would very strongly bat for the second option. All we have to do is to learn the theories of motivation, the theories of demotivation, and the theories of motivational interviewing. And once we do that, we will find that the physician is best placed to be the captain of the obesity care team. You need everybody along with you. But if you have behavioral modification as a skill, then you will be able to modify your team members and your patients and point them in the right direction. However, I think just 10 to 20% of our patients will respond to lifestyle modification alone. So therefore, in the vast majority, that is at least 80%, we will need pharmacotherapy. If the BMI is above 25 with complication or above 27 without complication in India, you can start pharmacotherapy. If the patient has regained weight after losing it, start pharmacotherapy. If the patient hasn't responded to lifestyle, start pharmacotherapy. If the patient is in Edmonton stage 2 or in the secured model, you feel that the patient needs aggressive therapy, timely therapy, start pharmacotherapy. We have only 2 drugs available in the country which are approved for obesity. One is Orlistat. It is approved for obesity. Liraglutide is not approved for obesity in India, but it is approved for use in diabetes or in diabetes. And it is approved in other countries like USA or European Union as an anti-obesity drug. This drug is used in a different dosage for obesity and in a different dosage for diabetes. However, the dose that is required for diabetes is less, for diabetes control is less. In India, you find that the lower dose, the anti-diabetic dose, usually suffices for weight loss. So this algorithm makes it very easy for us. Once you've decided to give pharmacotherapy, if your patient has metabolic or medical complications, then liraglutide is the first choice. If your patient has mood-related or emotional issues like craving or depression or smoking, then the first choice is naltrexone or bupropion. As physicians, we are not licensed to use this drug. Our psychiatry colleagues are allowed to use it, and they do have this drug available. So you can tie up with a psychiatrist. The first choice will be naltrexone bupropion. It will help reduce the craving for alcohol, tobacco also. And the second choice would be liraglutide. In both ways, in both places, Orlistat is the third choice. Sometimes this is also not effective, so we will need surgery for care. And this person-centered triage, this person-centered intervention, this is again what we put in front of you. Depending upon the severity of the disease and the severity of the complications, you decide how to start therapy. Irrespective of where you start, there is always a choice of escalating. There is a choice of de-escalating. And in fact, we must escalate slowly. The reason is something known as the metabolic set point. We all know that everybody has a particular metabolic set point for weight. If you want to hoodwink the metabolic set point, the easiest way is to go slow. Put in one intervention at a time. Let the weight come down by a kg or 2 kg. Then when the weight plateaus, then you add another intervention or you intensify. So just go stepwise, slow and steady wins the race. And always keep this in mind, the secure model, now the D is not here. Whenever you are speaking with your patient, discuss the severity of obesity, find the etiology, look for comorbid conditions and treat them, optimize metabolic and medical and mechanical health. Urge your patient to follow lifestyle changes. Sometimes simple lifestyle changes like sleep hygiene, time management, these also have an impact. Use medicines and surgery in a very judicious manner. You can use orlistat, liraglutide, we have already mentioned these. You can also use MNT, medical grade medical nutrition therapy. High protein replacements can be used. The definition of high protein is 24% protein and above. But in India now we have 38% protein preparations. The one that I use is called Vida Slim. And you can use these as complete meal replacement or as partial meal replacement. Remember that all the diabetes prevention studies that have been done or all the obesity studies that have been done have all used, most of them have used partial meal replacement. So this will be required. And of course, like we said in the very beginning, remember the targets and remember to define success along with your patient. But this is success for me. Today, India is playing very well against the English team. We must score a barrow sixer each time we play the game of obesity. In efficacy, remember to reduce weight and waste. In safety, remember to avoid malnutrition and avoid psychological ill health like orthorexia nervosa. And in tolerability, remember to ensure good metabolic health and also to avoid what is known as the yo-yo phenomenon or weight cycling. If we understand the basics of barochronology and we understand the basics of behavioral therapy, most of it is just good clinical sense. We can actually build up a good rapport with our patient, a good teamwork, and we can actually begin doing a good job in terms of managing obesity. If we are able to manage obesity in a sensitive and sensible manner, we will be able to ensure better health, overall health, not only metabolic, but better overall health for all our patients. So thank you. And we look forward to learning more from our surgeon friends and also from our chairperson and moderator. And thank you once again to the Gulbarga team for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjay, for your excellent, thought-provoking, crystal clear talk on obesity. There are questions we'll be taking at the end with Dr. Seshadri sir will be moderating. Now I request our surgical colleague, Dr. Abhishek Katakwar, to speak on recent advances in bariatric and metabolic surgery. Over to Dr. Abhishek.
World Obesity Day. I'm thankful to Gulbarga Society for organizing this meeting, and I'm also thankful to organizing committee. Thank you, Dr. Shivraj, Dr. Sangram, Dr. Murugesh, and all the eminent panelists and moderators. My topic is recent advances in bariatric and metabolic surgery. I being Associate Director at AIG Hospital, and we have been doing this surgery for last couple of years. So I'm going to share some of my experience here and what we have learned so far. Obesity has been always thought to be related to an imbalance between energy intake and expenditure. And there was always this policy of blaming the victim for eating too much or doing very less of exercise. But recent research have proved that it's a metabolic derangement, a hormonal imbalance cascade which is responsible for obesity. There is a lot of say about genetic polymorphism. There's a lot of environmental trigger responsible, and obviously the behavioral factor which are responsible. We also know that obesity causes a lot of things, metabolic problems like sex hormone imbalance, a metabolic syndrome, a mechanical stress leading to sleep apnea, osteoarthritis, low back pain, and shortness of breath, and obviously cardiovascular diseases. In past, there was a different perception of society about obesity, because obesity was seen as a weakness or a failure of an individual. And as I mentioned, the card of blaming the victim always played the role. But diet and exercise were also the prescribed treatment, and weight loss surgery was viewed as a dangerous and extreme measure. But now things have changed. In fact, a lot of societies have accepted bariatric and metabolic surgeries as a treatment option for diabetes and obesity, including the American societies. The risk factors have drastically came down with advanced laparoscopic surgery, and surgery has gained a lot of acceptance as a part of treatment modality. These are the few facts from WHO. The obesity has tripled since 1975. In 2016, 1.9 billion adults were overweight and 650 million were obese. Most of the world population live in countries where overweight and obesity kills more people than underweight. Childhood obesity is increasing rampantly, and there's a lot of attention being paid towards the childhood obesity nowadays. We also know that obesity has been categorized depending on the BMI. According to me, only BMI is a very subjective criteria. We should also look into the metabolic factors. Somebody who is just grade 1 obese but has a lot of comorbidities has a more troublesome life than compared to another person who has grade 4 obesity but does not have metabolic problems. Let's go back to the natural history of obesity leading to type 2 diabetes. We have eminent panelists here with us, the leading endocrinologists. They'll agree with me that obesity eventually leads to diabetes because the onset is very slow and progressive. And when we look at the natural history of type 2 diabetes, eventually you have hyperinsulinemia, which is responsible for more obesity, and gradually there is a beta cell failure, and then eventually leading to pancreatic burnout and causing a very severe form of diabetes. So I have two scenarios which are real life scenarios which we see in our day-to-day practice. A 19-year-old girl has a weight of 108 kg with a BMI of 38. She's a known case of polycystic ovary. She has to take withdrawal pills. She's hypothyroid. And when she came to us, we investigated upon her. She was found to have fatty liver with deranged liver function test. Her ultrasound also shows polycystic ovary. Surprisingly, she found to be diabetic with a very bad HbA1c, and cortisol was normal. We asked her to take further few tests. We took an opinion from our endocrinologist, and she was posted for bariatric surgery. We did a sleeve gastrectomy upon her, and now she is doing very well. The other case is a 45-year-old male with a weight of 116 kg with a BMI of 42. He had a right ACL repair. He's already hypertensive and found to have another fatty liver disease, and had an unstable right knee because of ACL tear. And this gentleman was also posted for bariatric surgery. He lost weight, and then eventually he did not require any further treatment for his right knee instability, because obviously once the weight reduced, the joint was more stable. So these are just two examples to highlight how bariatric surgery can help somebody in gaining back the way, coming back to their natural life, the healthy life. And it has been proved that there is 77% excess weight loss with bariatric surgery. There's 85% resolution of diabetes, OSA, hypertension, and metabolic syndrome. So now, right now, it has been accepted as a life-saving surgery. Now, bariatric surgery indication, this is a very important slide, because there's a lot of myth and ambiguity even among physicians. They don't know when to subject a patient, when to refer a patient for bariatric surgery. So these are the guidelines for Asian population. The guidelines are different for Western population. So anybody who has age of 18 to 65, and if below 18 years, like the one case which I presented, we took an opinion of a pediatrician also. If the BMI is more than 35 with or without comorbidities, if the BMI is more than 32 with comorbidities, if somebody's BMI is more than 30 with symptoms of metabolic syndrome, And recently, the metabolic surgery or diabetes surgery is getting a lot of popularity. Anybody who is diabetic with uncontrolled diabetes and has a BMI of more than 27.5 can take advantage of this metabolic surgery. Now, I do get a lot of question, physician, how does bariatric surgery help and what is the long-term outcome, how patients should be handled post-bariatric surgery. So bariatric surgery alone can't do miracles. It has to be followed by a lifestyle modification, diet, exercise, and behavior modification, which are the key to success after surgery. And also, there is a role of multidisciplinary team. When I say multidisciplinary, I mean endocrinologist, I mean hepatologist, I mean anesthesiologist, I mean a fitness expert, I mean a bariatric physician, I mean a reconstructive surgery specialist. So it's a team effort which brings fruitful results after bariatric surgery. So when we want to classify bariatric surgery, it's basically divided into restrictive procedure, maladaptive procedure, and a combination of these two procedures. When we talk about restrictive procedure, the sleeve gastrectomy, most of you must be aware about it. This is the most common procedure done worldwide right now, and in which we resect the greater curvature and approximately 70% of stomach. The ghrelin hormone comes down drastically. The person's satiety is very much improved, and the outcome can be seen very immediately within 1 or 2 months. And patient gradually loses weight over a span of 1 year. The other procedure, which is also known as the gold standard procedure, is laparoscopic Roux-en-Y gastric bypass. It is a technically demanding procedure, and it's also done by laparoscopy, in which we make a small gastric pouch, we bring along a small intestine, and then we create a biliopancreatic limb and an alimentary limb. So food goes from this gastric pouch to the alimentary limb, and the pancreatic juice and the bile comes through the biliopancreatic limb and mix with the food. Usually we bypass 100 and 100 centimeter, and the results are fantastic with this procedure, except for a few patients who see malnutrition and nutritional deficiencies, which has to be handled in a very correct way, or else it can lead to anemia and other problems. The other procedure known as mini gastric bypass or one anastomosis gastric bypass gaining a lot of popularity in Indian subcontinent. Though this procedure is not approved in America, it's not approved under insurance, but this procedure has gained a lot of popularity, and there are a few controversies attached with this procedure, but this procedure has gained a lot of popularity and the results are fantastic with this procedure. Now, few words about metabolic surgery for diabetes. I know that a lot of you must be interested about diabetes, whether diabetes can be tackled with this procedure. Yes, we do have a very advanced procedure, which is also known as metabolic surgery. The procedure name is loop duodenojejunal bypass with sleeve gastrectomy. There is another procedure which is called sleeve gastrectomy with ileal interposition. The diagram looks very complicated, and the surgery is also very challenging and demanding, and it is done by very few centers in India. And we are proud to say that we are one of the center doing this surgery, and we have seen wonderful results in our patient. A lot of our patients who were on very high doses of insulin, their insulin requirement came down. Some of them are off insulin. The basic purpose is to delay the progress of microangiopathy and delay the complication in stage problems associated with diabetes. Now, a very important question which comes to everybody's mind whenever I attend some meetings, this is a very common question asked by physicians and surgeons. How safe is bariatric surgery nowadays? So the answer is, in life, we always calculate risk and benefit. So we look at the risk involved, then we look at the benefit side. Any surgery has some risk, but this risk is not because of bariatric surgery or metabolic surgery. This risk is involved because of the comorbidities which these patients already have, like hypertension, obstructive sleep apnea, diabetes, and other related issues. But when we look at the brighter side, the benefit which patient can gain out of surgery in a long-term basis, definitely I would say that the benefits are more than the risk. And when compared to the risks of living with obesity, including complications like diabetes, sleep apnea, fatty liver, and hypertension, the increased likelihood of premature death with recent technological advancements and a team effort, the risk of laparoscopic bariatric surgery is minimal with our center. Now, a very important point, what are the key to success of this bariatric surgery? The follow-up is of utmost importance to avoid nutritional deficiencies. We see there are a lot of booming up claiming to do bariatric surgery, but one has to understand bariatric surgery is not like a gallbladder surgery or an appendix surgery where a surgeon operates the patient and then there is no communication beyond that. In bariatric surgery, we still have follow-up of our 5 years or 6 years back, the patients we have operated, because tendency of weight regain after 5 to 6 years in few of the patients, I'm not saying 100%, but few patients might regain weight. So we try to avoid the chances of weight regain in these patients, because after a few years, everybody as a human has a tendency to take things for granted. So this is more like a confession follow-up in which we try to counsel and re-counsel patients. And this is how we try to give a good name to this surgery, because we all know that the bariatric surgery has a lot of myths in the society. A lot of physicians do have a lot of doubts about the efficiency of this procedure. The weight regain, as I've already mentioned, is a concern issue, and it could be because of unrealistic by the treating surgeon saying that, okay, you get this surgery done and you can eat whatever you want to eat, whatever you want to do. And patient also wants to hear the same thing that, okay, doctor, I do this surgery, but I'm not going to change myself. So honestly speaking, behavior modification and lifestyle modification are the most important thing after bariatric surgery. Surgery does the 50% job, and the 50% job is done post-surgery when patient tries to change and modify his lifestyle. And with all thought and my presentation, I'm open to discussion. I'm sure you must be having a lot of questions. And with such an eminent panelist here, endocrinologist here, I welcome any questions from your side. Thank you so much for inviting me for this lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Abhishek, for our excellent deliberation on recent advances in metabolic and bariatric surgery. We will take the questions. Kindly be stayed with us. So now I request Dr. Krishna Seshadri. The hall is yours, sir. Kindly go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you, Dr. Abhishek, for an excellent deliberation. And we have about 20-25 minutes, right, Dr. Radha?
Yeah, yes, no problem. Half an hour. No problem.
Yes. Sanjay, are you there?
Yeah, yes.
So one of the very interesting talk that you gave, and I want to start off from there. A lot of times patients get demotivated, and that seems to be one of the when families bring patients for obesity. The acceptance of obesity itself is a great, and allowing people to understand that it's a problem that can lead to other complications itself is a great challenge for many of us as physicians. What is your approach to this? How do you take care of such patients? What are the initial conversations that you work with patients that will allow them to accept it without feeling low about it?
It's relatively easy for me to do that because I myself live with obesity. So what we say, and I think the toughest challenge I face is with the younger girls aged 16, 18, 24. So that's the toughest patient population for me. We tell them that we live with this. This is the way we started off, but we need to take charge ourselves. We do have a particular phenotype that we are born with, but we can optimize it. We can make it better. The simplest theory of motivation There are multiple theories. The simplest way is a binary theory, which talks about the need for achievement versus fear of failure. Let's look at it, Dr. Krishna, from the point of view of a school child who is maybe appearing for class 10 exams in mathematics. If the child is scoring 89% in the test, then the teacher will use the need for achievement motivation. She will tell him, why don't you study more? So instead of 89, you will get 95. If she tells this child, fear of failure, if you don't study, you will fail. The child is not going to be motivated. He knows that with from 89 maximum, he'll come down to 69. He's not going to fail. On the other hand, if it's a child who is scoring 34%, 35% of the test, there the teacher will use a fear of failure motivation. You have to study, otherwise you will fail. You will get stuck in this class. If she uses a need for achievement in this child, the child also knows he's not going to get a distinction and the teacher also knows. So it's flop. So in these children with obesity, in some of them, we do a need for achievement. So why don't we try to lose weight? Even if you do not lose weight, and then we fall back upon the Bhagavad Gita, that intent and everything, and we'll talk about the look ahead trial. Even if you do not lose weight, you will gain metabolic health. You will gain years. So that's a need for achievement. Fear of failure usually doesn't work in obesity. The fear of failure girls will come automatically and they say, I have to get married in 6 months' time and I'm facing these problems, so help me. That's a very temporary short-term kind of a thing. So these are some of the initial conversations. Another conversation that we have is that weight is an integral part of overall metabolic health. So you're trying to bring your blood pressure down. Earlier you were on monotherapy. Then your doctor added diuretics. Now he has had to add a calcium channel blocker. So there are a million reasons for high BP, but one of them is high weight. So why don't we bring it down? So you target blood pressure lowering medication reduction as a desirable target. The same for cholesterol, the same for diabetes. So we just create multiple reasons for trying to lose weight. Another thing would be to create a soft emotional blackmail. So my story with a lady might be that, see, very soon you're going to be a grandmother. I'm very sure you would want to run with your grandson. So if you lose weight, your knees will become better. You'll be able to play better with your grandson. So these kind of emotional soft touches.
It's the old jeans technique, buy a pair of jeans that you'd like to fit in and work towards it. Very nice. So Sanjay, I want a follow-up question on this, simply because this is just being the era of digital devices. What do you think are the role of apps and devices in helping in patients? While it's very touted, there's a lot of app fatigue also, isn't it?
But this is one place where there is so much of data, so much of evidence, which says that actually these apps help. You don't need to have every app. So one app which my daughter used and then she asked me to use, that is by Fitterfly. So you have a very dedicated team of a nutritionist, a psychologist, and an exercise physiologist, which interacts with you through the app and on telephone, and it actually helps. The very fact that you are recording your weight, you are recording what you eat every day, that helps you keep a check on yourself. And then you have these experts, all experts in their own domain, which is behavioral therapy, diet and exercise, talking to you every week. So they help you go on the right track. It's just like you can run on your own, that's amateur running. But if you want to do professional running, then you need a coach along with you. And 100 meters, you can still run on your own. But for a marathon, you have to have somebody supporting you. And this is like a marathon race. So that is one app which I myself use. The second app is Dance with Deepti. And Dr. Krishna, please don't laugh. But I knew you were going to laugh. I knew that. So Dance with Deepti.
I'm laughing because you told me don't laugh.
So Dance with Deepti, again, my daughter recommended. So there are so many of these physical activity apps and people trying to train, and so many of the Masala Bhangra apps in the north. But Dance with Deepti is so simple. She's a simple girl based in Bombay, I assume. And just go on that, subscribe, and you very free, easy, free to access. And you will find that she'll carry you along with you. She'll take you on the journey to physical activity in a very nice manner. So these are my two apps. I'm sure if I used 100 apps, I would get confused, but these are the two that I use, Fitterfly and Dance with Deepti. I find both of them useful. They do help me.
So I think next time you come down to Chennai, we should have a dance session together also.
We must. That is the best way. Yes.
I mean, I
You have
have two left
exercise which
feet.
is happy, which is meaningful.
I have two left feet, but you know, I'm happy to dance with you if it makes a difference to people in terms of, you know, getting this message together. In fact, when I tell people, you know, especially hostelites, a dance is a great way for people who live in the hostel. For many of them, security is an issue. They don't find out, they can't go and do outdoor things. I tell them, you know, choose your music, close the door, and dance. And it's such a great way to do
Yes.
this. It's really high intensity. So that is right. And you know, the simpler the better. After all, you know, the beauty of greatness is always it's simple.
Yes.
Sanjay, before I get Abhishek in, I have one more follow-up question for you, and that is is diets, right? A lot of times, you know, we keep talking about people come to us with different kinds of diets, right? Do you feel that, you know, isocaloric modifications in nutrients actually make a difference?
Yes, they do. So one is the quantity, the total number of calories, but then the second is where those calories are coming from. And then the third is how they are distributed over the day. So from Jodhpur, Dr. Abhay Singh also asked this question, how effective and how sustainable is intermittent fasting? That's also part of the same question. The answer is, in general, follow a balanced diet. Don't go into extremes, but do reduce carbohydrates as much as you can. Intermittent fasting is practiced by the Jain community. So in winter, for example, the Jain community in Punjab or Haryana or Uttarakhand has its dinner at around 5 p.m. and then they have breakfast at around 8 a.m. And it is part and parcel of life for them. They are happy with it because they get social support from within the family and within the community. I also can do intermittent fasting and I can do it for a short period of time. If I want to do it for a long period of time, my family has to support me. They will have to sort of, everybody in the family will have to have their cooking plans and their eating plans synergistic with me. I can't be 180-degree opposite to them. So each person's social setup is different. Supposing my job is at stake, I want to do intermittent fasting, but my boss doesn't let me. I have to sit with my boss for dinner and drinks every night. Then either I lose my job or I lose my weight. There's just a choice between these two. Regarding that question about isocaloric, uh, it's not just about weight, it's also about overall metabolism. So we know that if you take too much of carbohydrate, that is going to stimulate insulin. And there will be a time when the body will get fatigued. The beta cell will get fatigued producing all that insulin. So if we can reduce carbs and we can increase proteins, that actually helps the body. In India, so many of us are protein deficient. It doesn't hit us because we don't realize, but so many people coming with easy fatigability, not able to run, with mild edema, pretibial edema. These are all signs of adult kwashiorkor, subclinical kwashiorkor. And I think all of us should begin using this word without hesitation, subclinical adult kwashiorkor. That actually hits. And it tells our colleagues to take action. It tells our patients to take action, to take more of proteins. Earlier, the reason for taking more carbs was it was not taste or habits or anything. It was cost. Even now, carbohydrate you can get 10 rupees, 20 rupees a kg. If you go to Amma Kitchen, they will serve you carbohydrates only at 1 rupee or 10 rupees. Protein, vegetarian protein will cost 200 rupees a kg. Non-vegetarian protein will cost 400 rupees a kg. Fat, good quality ghee in Haryana will cost 550 rupees a kg. So it is expensive. If the patient can afford that, there's no harm actually in shifting, in reducing carbs and increasing calories from other sources. We use this also, sir, as a motivational tool. So in my OPD, many times people will come and they will say, this expensive medication that you're giving me for diabetes or for blood pressure, why is it required? Why can I not buy a generic equivalent? So then our question is, what about the rice that you eat? How much does it cost? So the average person will say, of course, I eat 60 rupees a kg rice or 100 rupees a kg rice. So then we say, you follow the same rule for your medication. For carbs versus proteins, when we are not able to get them to shift, we say, yeah, I understand that carbs are required. Bangladesh, 80% of their calories come from carbs. You see, actually, carbs are very cheap in Haryana. just 10, 20 rupees a kg. But all the high standard families, they all take high protein. You know, of course, it is difficult to afford protein, 200 rupees a kg. Everybody can't afford. And then you see the lady going back home and saying, I was semi insulted. They think I am from a poor family. I will show them. Now I'm going to eat high protein.
So I'm also going to get the right kind of medications.
Yes.
I have some personal experience with fasting simply because I've been a practitioner for now 20 years. I started with 4 days a month. Initially, 4 days a month was 36 hours, but my family rebelled. So I do 24 hours, which is previous evening to as much as possible. It's actually without water. So this is Nirjala. And now I've been able to increase it to 6 days a month. And I can tell you that, I think it works by reducing the calories, but over a period of time, you get used to it and it's nice. It does keep your weight down. I don't know if it reduces weight, but it maintains your weight. And it gives you that little control that it does. Is the data supported? I don't know if any data is, you're going to get that kind of data. The primate data is very nice. I don't know where the human data is going, but I would not recommend it to someone who's not, who's a diabetic or anything else. But from a personal front, I've been fasting for 20 years. I really like it. It's part of my lifestyle. My family hates it a little, but they've gotten used to it. So, Dr. Abhishek, I want to bring you in quickly here. Sanjay has been, working us through some amazing pieces of information and tips and techniques. But the most important thing is, there is a visceral hatred of physicians for bariatric procedures, right? So first, let's start out with what is the TINA for a bariatric procedure? When should a physician, absolutely have a checklist and say, you know what, I need to call Abhishek now?
So first of all, I would like to say one thing. We both of the physician and surgeon, when it comes to bariatric surgery, we are on the same page. The only thing is, in past, there were few incidents which have definitely brought bariatric surgery in the bad manners. But I would say that with recent advances, the recent technologies, with the training and the learning curve which has changed, it has really emerged as a ray of hope for a lot of patients. Now, the problem is because I'm being very honest. I've been practicing bariatric surgery since 2015 at AIG Hospital after I came back from States and Germany. So the difference which I found in India and outside India is, in India, we want to do everything. As a surgeon, I want to do everything. But when you go to the Western world, they are very specific, they are very goal targeted. So then I decided that I will not do anything else apart from bariatric surgery. That's the first thing I decided. I want to be a dedicated bariatric surgeon. That's the first thing. Second thing is, bariatric surgery is, a lot of people think that bariatric surgery is something like you make, you cut stomach, you make bizarre anastomosis and things are done. I say it's only the 50% job. The 50% job is done post-surgery during the follow-ups. The reason being, follow-up is missed in India to an extent that a lot of time patients get operated and they never turn up to the surgeon, and surgeon also never bothers to go back and see what has happened to my patient. So we have a very strong team which takes care of follow-up. Sometimes it happens that patients don't follow up with us. We try to track them back and find out what is their present scenario. And why it has gained bad name? Because previously, people were not able to handle complications. There were complications. There were immediate complications. There were delayed complications like malnutrition, anemia, patient going into severe malnutrition. Now with so many years of research, we know that, okay, somebody asked me this question, how do I decide which surgery would be suitable for which kind of patients? That's a very apt question, because in my mind, there is an algorithm. I see a patient, I take a detailed history, I spend not less than 1 hour to 1.5 hours with the patient and with the family in my first meeting. I see only 5 or 6 patients in a day because I give my enough time for patient to gain confidence upon me, and at the same time I want to understand as Dr. Krishna, you already mentioned that the family support is very important. So the same thing applies post-bariatric surgery. Whether family is able to or willing to support the patient post-operatively, because there will be a lot of changes which will happen in the life in the due course. So once I know this patient can tolerate this surgery, there's a lot of family support, there's high motivation, then depending on their BMI, depending on their comorbidities, we discuss with them and then we offer what kind of surgeries would be best suitable. The important thing here is, as a surgeon, I always communicate with the referring physician. I always keep them updated so that they also know what is being done to the patient. And in fact, sometimes I do tell my patients, once your surgery is done, if you are a native of some place, you go back and follow up with your original physician, because he's the person who has been managing you for years. And he's the right person. He knows in and out about you. So this is how I'm trying to, break the ice and get the best name for the surgery.
Okay, let me give you two follow-up questions. One is one of the chat questions. Do you measure leptin or GI hormones in deciding who requires surgery? Do you do any of those?
See, ideally speaking, all these should be done, but because of limited resources and financial issues, we do not go into the depth of it, but we have been doing a lot of research on these hormones, gut hormones, as a part of our research project. But definitely 2 or 3 things which are very important, which I do not miss, is fasting and postprandial C-peptide and insulin levels. They are the key factors, because I want to know the pancreatic reserve of the patient. That is a deciding factor. And sometimes it also convinces my patient, when they see that, okay, the insulin levels are very high. All of us know that the most important hormone for obesity is nothing but insulin, which has a double-edged sword. Insulin is required, but when it is in excess, it causes obesity. And
is there a correlation between the preoperative C-peptide levels and the occurrence of post-operative hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia? Have you seen that in your practice?
And also the chances of the chances of remission after surgery. Does it help you counsel your patient?
Yes. So we have different scoring system. Like one of them is called ABCD score. Then there is DIREM score, diabetes remission score. Then there are different scoring systems in which we put these values, and it will help us in deciding what would be the diabetes remission, because we do a lot of metabolic surgery for our patient, and sometimes the C-peptide level is even less than 1. So we have to explain them, okay, so your pancreatic reserve is going bad, but still we have some hope, so that they also gain confidence. So a lot of my patients, we use it as a tool for predicting the future diabetes remission. And
does it correlate with hypoglycemia?
Post-operatively?
Yeah, there are multiple reports of hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia reported in bariatric surgery. So, is there any correlation between the C-peptide levels, and have you seen that in your practice or in your studies?
In fact, we have seen one patient who had what you said, hypoglycemia post-surgery, and he had to undergo distal pancreatectomy to handle that situation after ruling out any other source of insulinome or other things. But in per se, preoperative C-peptide will not tell us post-operative hyperglycemia. It is just to predict the pancreatic reserve and to understand what could be the diabetes remission.
Before I get Sanjay back in, what is your opinion on endobarrier procedures? That are non-invasive, that seem to be somewhat of a fashion.
This question is for me or for Dr. Sanjay?
Yeah, for you, and Sanjay can come in also. Both of you are equal experts to me.
So we do have the Center of Obesity and Metabolic Therapy, where me and my colleague, Dr. Rakesh, we work hand in hand. He takes care of endobariatrics and I take care of laparoscopic surgery. There are different procedures which are gaining a lot of popularity. One of them is endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty. But in our hospital, we have some standard criteria which patient will go for endoscopic therapy and which patient will go for laparoscopic surgery. The reason being, we don't want, obesity and diabetes are chronic disorders. the person has already spent a lot of money on the treatment part. And we can't keep offering them, okay, first go ESG, if it does not work, go for laparoscopic bariatric surgery. It doesn't look ethical. So for endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty, we offer it to the patients who have BMI between 35 to 40 and who do not have comorbidities. I'm very strongly saying that if somebody has diabetes, do not offer, even if their BMI is 35 to 40, please do not offer endoscopic sleeve gastroplasty, because patient is going to come back to you after a few months of initial weight loss. Because
But what about barrier? What about just endoscopic barriers? I'm not even talking about sleeve gastrectomy, but there are devices that you can place. Isn't
so probably you're talking about endosleeve barrier.
Right.
And I think in India, we are the only center who are doing research on that. We are the first center to introduce. In fact, the trial is still going on. So basically it's called endosleeve. It is a long sleeve, which has a stent kind of thing on the front, and the sleeve is around 60 centimeter. We put it through the pylorus, the whole sleeve goes and bypass the duodenum and goes into the proximal jejunum. So the foot does not come in contact with the duodenum and the first part of jejunum. The whole concept behind this procedure is, we know that the duodenum is the new metabolic center. So once this foot does not come in contact with duodenum, we have seen a very good result even with diabetes also. So in future, this procedure is going to gain a lot of popularity in future. So we are still in the research. Because of COVID, it got stalled, and we are again going to resume it.
So maybe Sanjay, what part of endocrinology training should be, to be able to place an endosleeve barrier in the pylorus?
Yeah, it should be actually.
No, we should have some more procedures for endocrinologists. Let me to get back to
Abhishek, for the audience, would you like to talk about ABCD? And because when we have to refer patients to you, we also have to be able to give them a realistic expectation. Are we sending them to you just for cosmetic purposes, just for weight loss, or actually for metabolic benefit? And if the patient asks me, will my diabetes get cured if I go to Dr. Abhishek? So what's the ABCD formula that helps us understand? That helps us counsel.
Yes. So, sir, first thing is, if any of our patient asks us, can diabetes be cured? My answer is no, is always no. Diabetes and obesity are chronic lifestyle disorder. It cannot be cured. It can be controlled. It can be controlled to delay the complications of diabetes. So this is another thing which I would like to point out here. Dr. Krishna rightly said why bariatric surgery has not gained popularity. The reason being unrealistic expectations which are given by operating surgeon. They make big promises. Okay, you will lose this much weight. You will be cured of diabetes. It will never come back. It is a foolproof mechanism. It's not like that. We have to understand, when somebody undergoes a knee replacement surgery, they say that after 10 years, probably you might have to undergo again a knee replacement or something like that. There is a lifespan of everything. So the same thing applies to bariatric surgery also. And when we speak about ABCD score, I don't want to go into the detail of each and individual things, but ABCD score and diagram score are available on internet. These scoring systems are actually very good for any physician to understand the future prediction of diabetes remission in your patient. They have different criteria to include, and these are actually being proven by different, in literature, it has been proved that they are validated.
So we have 3 minutes to go. So I'm going to do some quick firing questions and then stop. Sanjay, metformin in management of obesity? You can also comment on thyroxine also.
Yeah, you can try it, but not a good idea. It does suppress appetite though. Yeah. And thyroxine use only when indicated, not otherwise.
Okay. Second question, and Sanjay, this is for you. In the future, there is a pipeline of medical products that are promising, and especially in combination, promising weight loss to the extent of bariatric surgery. Your comments on that?
That's a right question or a valid comment. So in the next year, we hope to get injectable semaglutide, Injectable semaglutide is approved abroad for use in diabetes in a lower dose, 0.25, 0.5, 0, and 1.0 milligram per week. But 2.4 milligram per week, this will be for obesity. Also in development are injectable semaglutide plus amylin agonist. And another one from Pfizer is a small oral GLP-1 RA. Dabiglobin or something is the name. It should be in the market by 4 or 6 years. This will be a small oral drug, GLP-1 RA. Yet another one from Eli Lilly is tirzepatide. Tirzepatide is also a dual agonist, and this should be available for use in 3-4 years. So the coming decade is actually quite exciting. Like Dr. Abhishek said, the endoscopic procedures, they will gain traction, and the drugs that we have, both oral and injectable, should gain traction. What we can look forward to in the next 1 year or so is injectable semaglutide.
Last question to both of you.
I have one question to ask to both of you. It is a very conceptual question, if I may ask.
Please.
Yeah.
So imagine somebody who is 120 kg, has severe insulin resistance, has bad diabetes, and you have to advise that patient insulin, I mean the external insulin. So I always ask this question to endocrinologists. We already know that there is hyperinsulinemia, which is causing more obesity. It's a vicious cycle. And again, for uncontrolled diabetes, we have to again prescribe more insulin. So how does it work? I don't understand this concept. Hyperinsulinemia, more insulin.
Along with that, you give sensitizers. So if you classify all glucose lowering therapy, either it is a secretagogue or a secretory insulin. So that's the first. Imagine that to be a bactericidal antibiotic, Abhishek. Our sulfonylureas and our insulin.
Okay.
The second category is metformin, pioglitazone. These are sensitizers. Think of them like bacteriostatic antibiotics. So both have their own place. Of course, here you can give both in combination. In surgery, you would not want to give a sidal and a static antibiotic together. But if you have a fluctuant abscess, then you have to operate. The treatment of choice is not Metrogel or Taxim. It is incision and drainage. Our equivalent of incision and drainage is SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1 receptor agonists. You use calorie restriction mimetics. They mimic calorie restriction either through the GIT or at the hypothalamus or in the kidney. So you will give insulin and you will also give an incision and drainage. Then it will work. Why currently that patient is not responding to the endogenous insulin? Imagine that you are in the middle of the ocean. There is lots and lots of water around you, but not a single drop to drink. It's all saline water. So there may be a lot of insulin, there may be a lot of glucose, but the cells are not able to get it. When you add the incision and drainage, then you find the good results. So that is a way of explaining to surgical colleagues.
This is the most convincing answer I have ever found.
Then so since you're convinced, I'm not going to add to it, but instead come to the last question to the two of you, and maybe anyone can answer this. In this last 1 year, we've all been sitting down. We've been sitting down for the last 90 minutes. In fact, sitting is the new smoking, right? So what is it that we as clinicians talk? What would you talk to your patient, every diabetic patient, every obese patient who comes to you about activity? A lot of times, many of our patients think that half an hour morning walk is their exercise, and then they sit all the time. So we'll start with Abhishek, 10 seconds, Sanjay, and then we close.
I ask my patients to keep, if they're working in an office, I ask them to keep everything in a different corner. Put your printer on the other corner, put your something on the other corner, put one thing on the one corner so that you keep moving. And obviously the trend of, working desk, which standing desk, which has come up. So standing desk is another option. And in fact, we have a lot of apps, a smartwatch, which can remind you of activity and drink water and do something like that. That is what I tell them.
I stand. It's a standing OPD. I go to work at 9, come back at 2 or 3. I remain standing the whole day. And patients see that, so I don't have to say anything. I don't use a chair and table.
Excellent. So with that, it's time for us to stand up.
Another advantage.
This is the last point. You can take it home, Dr. Birada.
Yeah,
I know
Dr.
Abhishek
Krishna,
had a point. Abhishek had a point first.
Another advantage of an standing OPD for Dr. Sanjay would be the patient will not take a lot of time of yours.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, it increases the speed and the velocity. It actually does.
no,
I'm
Dr.
afraid you
Krishna,
have to get into an escape velocity now. Sanjay, Dr. Biradar.
yes, sir. There are 2 questions on the chat box. The attenders will be happy if
Sir,
you don't
we
mind
have
to
done
take.
everything. Carnitine has no role. We could do pregnant. Sanjay, Abhishek, within 20 seconds, pregnancy after bariatric surgery.
Yes. The only thing I would say that a lot of my patients who were taking infertility treatment before surgery, they conceived by natural method post bariatric surgery. A lot of them who had PCOD and they had to take withdrawal pills post surgery, they did not require it. And I have those messages with me. They made my day when patient said, "Doctor, I feel like a complete woman today. For the first time, I had my menses without pills."
Also, it helps to stay together. A lot of people who never got pregnant and went to infertility clinics before COVID were forced to stay home and actually conceived. So that is also true. Okay, the most important objective is to go home on time, Dr. Biradar.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Abhishek. I learned so much from both of you.
Thank you so much.
This has been such an edifying, great meeting.
Thank you
But
so much.
it's
Yeah, before we conclude, I request Dr. Shivraj Alsetti to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of all the delegates who have joined from all over the country and the great faculty which we have. Over to Dr. Shivraj Alsetti for vote of thanks.
Good evening to everybody. All of you agree that it was an excellent discussion, aptly on the World Obesity Day. Now, first and foremost, I thank Dr. P.S. Shankar, who was readily agreed to inaugurate this particular session. And I also thank Dr. Bansi Sabu, who is President RSSDI and Indian Obesity Society, who for his good opening remarks onto the inauguration of this particular symposium. I thank Dr. Sanjay Kalra from Karnal for his excellent talk on personalized obesity problems, how to approach them, and also thank Dr. Abhishek, who has talked on various aspects of bariatric surgery. And I hope in the coming days, the bariatric surgery will become more and more popular. People will accept it. And also thank Dr. Krishna Seshadri, who moderated very well and answered all the doubts that the other audience were having. So I thank you one and all. I thank the participants for their active participation in this particular project. Thank one and all from behalf of NESAR. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Thank you. I lastly thank all the audience before we sign out. Thank you one and all. Good night.
Thank you.